I'm going to start from the beginning, and then I'm not going to start from the beginning again.
We got it. Welcome to This Should Be a Game, a podcast about adaptive media and filtering 90% of your life experiences through tabletop role-playing games. I'm Satah. I use they, them pronouns. You can find me on Bluesky at potatochips.gaygothvibes.online, and you can check out my website at gaygothvibes.online. Thank you for joining me, the NASA PR person, at this press conference. First, we're going to hear from a subject matter expert, my co-host, Jess. Jess, where can people find your fringe yet effective rocket telemetry theories?
I am constantly publishing overcomplicated theories at jessfrom.online on Bluesky, on my website jessfrom.online, and as Jumpgate Games on itch.io, so you can find all my stuff there.
Beautiful. And, of course, we're all working together so Ooh. Has anybody ever talked out loud before?
I don't think so. I'm glad that we're pioneering it.
We are, of course, working very hard together down here to get you home safe, Caleb. And where can people find the video diary of you gently losing your mind in isolation?
Yeah, I'm Caleb Zane Huett. You can find me at calebzane.com. I'm also the creative director of Haunted Table, so you can go to shop.hauntedtable.games and buy Triangle Agency, which is the main way to make sure that I continue to live.
To keep you alive here on Earth.
Yes, and honestly, I would say if you want to hear my video logs, mostly those are available on Folio, another podcast you've probably heard of.
Yeah, that might be true. Yeah, absolutely. The basic idea here is that we are going to be using the 2015 movie The Martian as a jumping off point to design a TTRPG over the course of a few episodes. We're going to sort of funnel ourselves into that discussion, systematically chopping the movie down to its bare essence, starting with a full summary from Jess.
We first meet the crew of the Ares 3 in 2035, only halfway through their 30-day manned mission on Mars, when a severe dust storm strikes, causing Mission Commander Lewis, Jessica Chastain, to scrub the mission and order them back to the Mars Ascent Vehicle, or MAV, to leave the planet ASAP before the MAV tips over and they have no way off. As they fight their way through the dust, flying debris strikes our protagonist, Mark Watney, played by Matt Damon. The other astronauts lose radio contact with Watney, and with visibility at near zero, Commander Lewis is forced to order launch, with Watney presumed dead. Back on Earth, NASA is forced to announce Watney's death, worried about the PR impact that this will have. Meanwhile, Watney wakes up alone on Mars, staggering back to the hab to treat his injuries, and beginning an official vlog of his attempt to survive. With no way to communicate with Earth, he concludes his only chance is to hold out until the next scheduled Mars mission in 4 years, Ares 4, and somehow make his way to its landing location, far away at the Schiaparelli crater. Watney, a botanist, gets to work cataloging what resources were left behind, rationing remaining food, converting rocket fuel to water, and using human waste to fertilize potato crops grown in the hab. Finally, he modifies the crew's rover to handle the journey to the Ares 4 site. On Earth, NASA satellite planner Mindy Park, an unbelievably small bit part for icon Mackenzie Davis, notices satellite imagery of the Martian hab exterior changing, and suspects Watney is alive. NASA Director Teddy Sanders, Jeff Daniels, is forced by law to announce his survival, panicking about the PR once again. Watney realizes he can dig up the decommissioned Pathfinder rover and, once Earth realizes what he's doing, uses it to send images back to Earth. They work out a communication system based on Earth rotating the rover camera remotely until a team on Earth finally instructs him how to link the computer systems and start a text thread to and from Mars. Watney finds out NASA did not inform his mission crewmates currently journeying home on the Hermes that Watney is still alive, due to concerns that a guilty crew would make mistakes, and after some publicly broadcast cursing, NASA informs the crew. A long montage of Watney's struggle to survive ensues, with an airlock explosion that destroys the potato garden and other crises. Teams at NASA rush to prep an unmanned resupply ship to launch at Mars on a near-impossible timeline, which requires skipping safety inspections, after which the ship explodes on launch. But The Chinese space program then offers their own launch vehicle. Meanwhile, astrophysicist Rich Purnell, Donald Glover, figures out a new plan. Use the Chinese vehicle to instead resupply the Hermes in orbit and gravity slingshot them around Earth and back to Mars to pick up Watney 2 years sooner. With only one launch vehicle ready, they're forced to choose, and the cautious NASA director decides not even to inform the Hermes crew of Glover's plan, worrying that extending their mission would risk their lives too much and possibly create a PR crisis that would jeopardize long-term NASA plans. Flight director Mitch Henderson, Sean Bean, secretly sends the plan to the Hermes crew anyway, who force NASA's hand by maneuvering for the slingshot. If NASA fails to resupply them, they'd all die, forcing the NASA director to announce that this was their plan all along. With planning support from Earth, Watney just barely rations his resources long enough to hold out, and works with Earth teams to finish repurposing the rover to reach the Ares 4 Mars Ascent Vehicle, MAV again, that's already sitting in the crater and would allow him to rendezvous with the Hermes in orbit. After 2 years alone on Mars, he makes the trek, then, together with Earth, strips the MAV down to its skeleton to achieve the speed necessary for the orbital pickup and launches. Struggling to match their relative velocity, the Hermes crew is forced to set off a bomb in their airlock to eject part of their atmosphere and shift their position enough for a Hermes astronaut to spacewalk far enough that Watney, by puncturing a hole in his suit, can fly himself back to his crewmate. With the whole world watching, they victoriously reunite and fly home. We end on a 5 years future segment where Watney instructs his freshman class of astronaut candidates on space survival, and the Ares 3 crew watch the Ares 5 mission launch for the next mission to Mars.
What an unnecessarily stacked cast.
I was gonna say, my main keyword phrase for this movie is criminally underutilized. It somehow manages to make every single performer feel like they were robbed of a scene or two where they could have done something.
And I didn't even list the whole, we've also got Kristen Wiig, we've also got Michael Pena, we've got Kate Mara and Sebastian Stan. It's nuts. It's crazy.
Kristen Wiig is the biggest. I think there's a lot of crimes. But I think what is done to Kristen Wiig in this film, there was a point, I was watching this with a friend of mine, there was a point where I was like, this is literally disrespectful. They make her stand in a room and get bonked on the head by a stapler while she pretends to not understand what's going on, while they explain things that any viewer of the movie would understand, and she's a fucking NASA official. It's crazy. She's not allowed to say a single joke. There are plenty of jokes in this movie, but Kristen Wiig was not brought here to say any of them. Baffling.
Other than that, Caleb, what was sort of your personal experience of this movie? What did you take away from it?
I have to be careful for this to not take up 1 million years of time, because I actually I started taking notes and then I stopped taking notes because I had too many strong and powerful things to say. So I was like, I have to just lock these down. I'm going to start with some of my roasts, and then I'll go into the things that are the most positive. This is not exactly a roast, but this movie is about saying numbers out loud. And I think that the game is going to have to in some way reflect that idea, because the true star of this film is saying a series of numbers out loud. And it's trying to emphasize the satisfying feeling of going, we can only do that in 60 days. And so we're going to do it in 29, and it's like, perfect. Okay, great. That feels amazing.
It's just people betting on dates constantly. They're just sliding paper across each, being like, I've got 120, make it 100. I can't, I have 120, make it 100. And they're like, we made it 100.
He's a genius.
It's the Star Trek, it'll take me an hour to fix the engine, Captain. You have 20 minutes.
I also want to say that my second major thought about the way this film is put together is that character traits are secondary to a percentage number of exactly how many times they're allowed to be right of the things they assert. So the movie is very easily sorted from NASA director, for whom every single thing he says is wrong and becomes wrong over the course of the movie, to Mark Watney, who is never, ever, ever, ever wrong, no matter what, from the very first second of the movie. And you can make this perfect gradient of people. Donald Glover is nudged one away from Mark Watney, and Kristen Wiig is nudged one away. And there's this really weird feeling throughout the movie that none of their actual character traits are as important as you learning that hierarchy over the course of the film. Like
Totally.
when someone says something, you know if it's going to go bad.
I'm hearing attribute numbers. I'm hearing skill checks.
Literally. And then, especially with tabletop stuff in mind, there is a literal D20 roll that is like central and in the middle of this film. And it is that the NASA director goes, we're not going to do safety checks. And he's like, how often do the safety checks come up with something bad? And they say 1 in 20.
1 in 20.
And
I didn't even think about that. That's so funny.
Incredible.
Well, literally, I said out loud.
One.
I was like, everybody on Earth knows those are horrible odds now because of our experiences. Like, there's no reason to do that.
That's so funny. Yeah, absolutely.
And then more emotional takeaways. This movie has like a palpable filter of like Gen X excitement and like vision of the world over every second of it. Like, there's like the bizarre like half dunking on disco while also using it all the time because the music's obviously very good, combined with this like logic and reason will save us in every situation, no matter what, no worries.
Liberal technocraticism, absolutely.
Yes. Yes. Well, and I was like startled. I hadn't realized how long it had been since this movie came out, and realizing that it was 2015 was really an added interesting complexity to the way it feels, because the vision of 2035 that it paints really ceased to be possible immediately following this film's release.
Right, totally.
NASA just like does not exist like that anymore and doesn't work like this. But you can imagine when Andy Weir was writing The Martian that there is an element of potential realism to a lot of it. And it's obvious that the draw of the story is like most of the problems he's talking about are kind of real and like but there's a lot of it now that's like, oh, it is almost like embarrassingly optimistic in certain points. Yeah, right. Okay, what else? I think the extended Sean Bean Lord of the Rings thing actually pays off because he ends up being the only one that betrays NASA, which is funny.
That's why they do the Lord of the Rings reference in the middle.
Yeah, because he's sitting there.
Right. Yeah, okay.
They call it the Council of Elrond, and at the moment I was like, well, this is annoying because it's just because Sean Bean's there. And then when his character actually does, in fact, like betray the Council, I was like, okay, fine, you earned it, I guess, that he is the one.
Okay, my one other Lord of the Rings diversion. I have a Viggo Mortensen broke his toe moment in this film, which is that when Donald Glover's amazing character shoots out of his seat excitedly and then like trips and falls on the ground out of frame. That wasn't planned. Donald Glover actually trips and falls and hurts himself significantly. But they kept it because the shot is great. You can cut that if we need, but I love it.
That's so funny.
That's awesome. Well, and that was one of the things, again, the like underutilization. He came off pretty good in this movie, but it was like it was like this incredible breath of fresh air the second he started doing anything. It was like, oh wow, we're watching a character move through space. We're not seeing some numbers move through space.
So I have to say, just because you've been talking about character stuff specifically, I first watched this movie a couple years ago and I did not like it. I had some pretty strong opinions about Mark Watney specifically, and like you're saying, the way that he is always right, and that none of the stakes hit for me because it was so obvious that he was just always going to be correct and brilliant. And that I think the Letterboxd review I left was like, this is a magnificently technically proficient film that I couldn't connect with at all because none of the characters exist. And I need to confess something, which I have talked about already online briefly. To rewatch this movie for this podcast, I did watch it at 1.5 speed. And it was a lot better. I liked it a lot more. I think what I learned is that last time I watched it, I watched the extended version, and this time I watched the regular version, and I watched it at 1.5 times speed. The extended version, even more Mark heavy. There's a lot more hanging out with Mark and him being brilliant and alone. And that was a problem for me. And so my ideal experience of this movie is apparently very fast and not the extended version. I've never done this specific movie crime before. I don't even listen to audiobooks faster or do this with podcasts, but I thought that this would be a good movie for this show, and I didn't want to watch it for 2.5 hours. And so instead I watched it for like an hour and a half.
And the other thing is that, like, this movie is at its best when it's the crews on Earth all working together to try and help him, and like like it's a little like hoorah, but like in a way that is so deeply satisfying. And this movie, when this movie does have an emotional core, that's the one that hits. And so it makes sense that, like, as getting a feeling of more density of that in this movie probably improved the experience.
And honestly, Satah, you did a very The Martian maneuver, because Ridley Scott came to you and said, I can only adapt The Martian in 2.5 hours. And you said, give it to me in 1:45.
Exactly. Yeah, so true. I'm just playing along at home.
And to bring this to game, I feel like it's going to be such a big element. We might get back to this, but just of how do we simulate all these different teams working together? How do we represent and inhabit all of these like big collaborative efforts? It just feels so core to adapting this movie.
Yeah, what I was thinking, and this is probably my last big like surprise. I had never seen this film. I haven't read the book, but I realized that I had completely like mashed it up with the film Moon in my head. And so I have seen some of Moon. And so I went into this movie expecting to see Mark Watney get like basically like beat up for an hour, right? Like I thought we were going to see a little bit of that like exhausted, lonely, like this is really tough kind of stuff. But the movie actually goes out of its way to make sure that you never have to feel that. Like there's one point where he apparently takes a 13-day journey to go find an old like rover that was dropped in the dirt, and you would be forgiven for not noticing that it's 13 days, because in the film it's 2 minutes and he doesn't complain at all. But they have someone on Earth be like, he's been driving in that little box for 13 straight days, and I was like, whoa,
gotta get the numbers out loud.
Right. The numbers are what matters.
Like, it's really too bad, because the moments where he shows vulnerability are great. Like the first time that he's able to directly text somebody, and you see that moment of like, oh, I'm talking to another human being in some form for the first time in months or whatever, and he is like very emotionally affected by it. It's like, oh, that's great. But then most of the rest of the time, he's just so quippy. He's so quippy that it makes it difficult to connect with, for sure.
Yeah, I like I thought about those conversations as well, because I was thinking about like, oh, it's an interesting mechanic to limit conversation between players. Like that's an interesting idea. Like how do you make it so that conversation is like on a delay or something like that? What I found most funny about the movie, and this is because it was a movie and I didn't want to make them have me sit through these because they were excruciatingly slow typers and speakers when they were talking to each other via typing. But those conversations would be like 3 lines back and forth, and then they'd stop. And I was like, if this was me, I would have trapped these people in a conversation with me for like 5 straight hours, being like, I've been stuck on Mars for months. Like, I'm in a normal chat room now. Like, we are talking.
I'm just always online. Somebody better always be at a keyboard, because I am going to be typing. Yes. How's your day? What did you have for breakfast? I had potatoes.
Yeah, I'm having horror nightmares about the like fact that I've been hanging out with plutonium for a straight year. Like,
there's like my thoughts sort of game-wise as I was watching were like, obviously there's some sort of solo experience here. One of the things I'm really curious about is an idea of like, as you're saying, sort of the crews working together and that kind of thing. I'm really curious about a specific element of like, everyone's playing part of like a ground crew, and they are trying to save somebody, and that person is not a player. And I think some amount of like bringing in those communication elements, like I was trying to think of like, you know, the game asks you to just grab a random book and flip to a random page and interpret, like, be like, oh, I just used my like satellite imagery power to learn that Mark is, and then just like pick a random sentence off the page, be like, okay, I think that means that this is happening, you know? And just like interpreting elements when you can't communicate directly, and then maybe there's like a level up where it's like now we can, and then that changes or something.
Progressing
and the other
over the
thing,
course
like,
of it, I love that.
Yeah, and it in the vein of this is a movie and possibly game about saying numbers out loud. One of the other notes I made was like, this might be a game about just creating models of shit. Like, because for some reason, everybody always had to have a full scale model of anything that was happening. Like, they're like, well, we need to teach Mark how to dismantle this rocket ship. And so not only we need to build a tiny but to scale version of the rocket ship. And we actually need to build 3 because everybody on the Zoom call needs their own one.
Yes. And they need salt shakers and pepper shakers to represent anything that's moving through space.
That's the other thing. I think an element possibly of having to grab random objects to explain stuff feels potentially vital.
There's an interesting texture to this movie in everything, both the physical representations you're talking about, but also in the way that it writes and handles comedy that I found, like, it seems obvious that it's because they knew this movie was going to be, like, an enormous smash hit that literally everybody watched. But everything gets explained 3 times at once. And every joke starts off very funny and then gets told 2 more times in quick succession, like, in the way that it's described afterwards, in a way that makes them, like, become painful to me, where I'm like, I'm with you, like, first joke, I'm with you, funny, you did a great job, and then they have another character say it again and then say it again, and you're like, okay, I'm there. And they do the same thing with the physicality, where, like, and this is where you were saying a really competently made movie, like, this is where it's like, it's actually amazing that they were able to do this. Every little idea that they introduce into the film is so perfectly illustrated for you that by the time they're done talking about it, you get it so well that you couldn't possibly not understand.
Which for a hard sci-fi movie that this kind of is, like, that's wild.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really tough. And it got me thinking that, like, the biggest challenge I would have as a player of a game like this is, like, I feel completely ill-equipped to come up with a genuine problem, right? Like, how do you even do that? And how do you get that same feeling of, like, this is real, this is a texture we can solve, you know?
Yeah, I had a couple things coming to me on that when I was taking notes. One is that, like, crises in this movie can often hit out of nowhere. And some of them they also, like, directly, like, you know, with the if we skip inspection, something might happen, but, like, plenty hit out of nowhere. And I'm just seeing, I know I'm going to say this over and over again in the show, but I'm just seeing tables and tables of these things that, like, you get to work with so that you don't have to come up with them yourself. And also it helps that Seda is just insanely talented at making tables. But, like, giving you all of that raw material. And then the other version of it is really abstracting this out. And maybe that gets away from what you're saying of, like, making this feel as, like, hard and logical as the movie does. But we really do have the opportunity to say, like, one of the first things that came up for me was the Quiet Year project dice. Because they're constantly running so many projects simultaneously, and they're constantly counting these clocks down of, like, we have 60 days before we can launch this, we need to get it down to 40, Mark has to grow potatoes in this amount of time, we have this much food left, we have this much of this resource, and I'm like, they're just, like, juggling project dice and trying to count them down before something bad happens, and, like, even resource scarcities in the Quiet Year, like, so much of it, like, imagining Quiet Year Skin of the Martian with an insanely different tone so it should not be the Quiet Year is still so funny to me. And, like, you can abstract out some of these problems and even get the numbers out loud with the representation of, like, there are all of these. For those who don't know the Quiet Year project dice, you on your turn can start a project or count a project down, which is a 6-sided die that starts on a random number, and then you are counting it down to represent completing it in order to try to improve a situation or solve a problem. And if you don't manage to do that, a problem gets worse, a scarcity gets worse. And so I feel like that gets at some of the essence of what is happening without requiring the sort of, like, hard sci-fi piecing things together.
Yeah, that's really interesting, especially because one of the feelings that I was having watching this is that, like, there is something so LARPy specifically about the problem. Like, there's I think it's the, like, separating into groups and doing your things and then coming back and, like, working on these, and then there's, like, you know, the 3 facilitators being, like, they're, like, off to the side and they're having their, little discussion about what's happening, and then they're coming back and they're like, you know, this crisis happened, and just sort of like there's this feeling of the like multiple groups that are coming together to play the same game, but they're also playing their own games. And I don't know,
mega
like
game.
Yeah, that is really the feeling that I was having with this, and I'm really curious. It's kind of funny because this gets into like a totally different conversation about like where's the line between tabletop role-playing game and LARP, and that's a whole other conversation. But just like vibe-wise, I would love to, I think, capture some of that feeling if possible.
And you do get that feeling in the movie in a funny way. Something I remarked on while I was watching it was that someone on their team, maybe it's Ridley Scott, is really good at very quickly painting a picture of like a dozen people in a still frame shot that all look different and all look interesting, and you get introduced to a team like really quickly. We keep getting shown these really gorgeous framed shots of like 20 people who are all turned different ways but are all looking at the camera, who are all like posing in this interesting way, and you're like, wow, I want to know about every single person in this room. Like, that person had a weird voice, like what's going on here? And that feeling of like there's a bunch of people here all adding up to you getting just a quick jolt of information is like a really nice texture.
Yeah, there really is like a very the dramatic silhouette, the curtain coming back and everybody's posed perfectly on their, like, in their business on the stage. That's really interesting, and it communicates a lot, and that's really cool, just building off of that as like a stage setting thing.
And building off of what both of you are saying there, I'm now thinking about the idea of like, if we don't have the astronaut as a player, then we can't really separate, you know, those two groups. But there's also, think about like, I didn't name them by name, but the JPL, the Jet Propulsion Lab, is like a big lab that we shoot out to and see those big frame shots of 1 million people working to do this. And they are constantly communicating with the Jeff Daniels NASA director room. And like, I'm imagining we have 4 players and 2 of them are the NASA director team and 2 of them are JPL, and maybe even not permanently, but like for a scene. And NASA director team has to go, well, this is what I need from you. And JPL has to work separately and be like, okay, this is what we can give you. And then the NASA director team goes, well, this is now what I need from you if that's all you can give me. And they have to reach out to different resources, like the splitting off and like having to figure out among small groups, this is what we can do, this is what we need. And maybe that's dice rolls and conversations and stuff and coming back together is a possibility. Maybe that's a lot to manage, but like if we're aiming to emulate that feeling.
Yeah, and speaking of a lot to manage, I mean, while we're still in this like structural conversation, another angle for this that also gets at the like feeling of the asynchronous communication would be if like a session has to happen as a whole with one of these groups, and then the information that comes for it has to be passed on to another group for another session. And I originally, when I was thinking about this, I was like, oh, you could simplify it down to like, there's one group that's like all of the Earth people, and then there's one solo player who's like making moves on Mars. But I do really like the idea that's been floated of that player being the like thing that's most randomly generated, because it's the easiest, like, here is a source of something bad. Like, really, that person is just representing Mars. So it's like, here's all the horrible things that are happening on Mars. Like, we can give you all of that stuff, and then you have to talk through how you can help or what advice you want to give or whatever. I think the one thing that does, which I think is good because of exactly what we've complained about in the movie, is it takes away some of the power of Mark Watney, right? Like, it removes his ability to be a superhero genius to a degree. And I actually think that's good, because I think that's the part of the movie that's the like saddest to have to grapple with, which is like, and maybe that's a silly way to put it, but for me, it's very uplifting that everybody works together to solve this problem. It's like a little bit sad to have to think about like, this only really worked out because this one guy, on top of being a botanist, is actually like a complete genius in every way and responds to every situation perfectly.
In our game, Mark Watney is an oracle.
Yes, exactly. And maybe that is part of it, is that the solo character always does do the best that they can, right? Like, that's what you're getting, is you're not getting someone who's messing up, you're getting someone who's reacting to problems. But they are perfect, you know, and in that case, you know, you have the best chance to save them. But they're not you, and you're not pressured to be perfect.
The perfect player is the perfect thing to reduce to automata, because then they just act like, Yeah.
I really love this, like, pulling in elements of like asynchronous play and different groups. I think that this is an idea that I come back to a lot, and I've just never found like a perfectly realized version of it, but just like, yeah, games that evolve, that you like develop and then pass on to other groups, or that you have multiple people invested in different ways. Like the idea of a game that there's downtime, that there's almost solo downtime activities. Like you get together, you do a session, and then you have like, you sometime in the next, month before we get together, you need to play this mini game, or you and this other person need to play this little mini game of like fill in your thing, and then we'll all come back together and be like, all right, team, here's here's what we made happen.
We could also, and I'm not saying this is necessarily the plan, but we could also make this a play-by-post first game, or an epistolary style game.
Yeah.
That is still collaborative, but collaborative play-by-post. I'm thinking like it could even like, friend of the show Will Yobst has done This Discord Has Ghosts in It, which is a simultaneous like Discord LARP type game, but like I'm imagining a Discord server with a JPL channel and a NASA channel, or genericized versions of that term, where you are asynchronously collaborating as these teams and then reporting to other teams, and then whatever they give you, you have to pick up and do something with. Not necessarily a direction we want to go, but I'm just putting it out there as in our toolkit.
Yeah, and there's room, depending on how structured you want to make like what the Oracle situation is, to have it be a set time frame in the way that the film is, right? Like every time, like we have this much food, we're gonna be done with this game in 1 year, but we're gonna do a real time approach of like 130 days. Here is what can we get done in that time? What does that mean? And that might mean there's a lot of like breaks. That's like, well, now we're just waiting on this spaceship to move for 30 days, so we talk through what we're going to do next or whatever. But there's room for that to be part of the texture of it too. Literally saying like, when you start playing this game, you will be playing for 400 days.
That's so fun. I think that like whatever the structure is, everyone having their own agenda is important on some level. I'm thinking specifically, there's a scene where it's like, we can't tell them that he's alive. That would be a problem. No, we have to. And like it would be a PR disaster. No, it's important because I care about the human beings who are on this ship or whatever. And just like giving people like not only their expertises and their sort of jobs, but some sort of personal motivation that they care about, like directing the narrative, sort of.
We're getting very mega game and LARPy again. Like you come in and here your win condition is blank, which might just be like very story narrative heavy.
Okay, pitch. The second Oracle is the NASA director who's always wrong. So
interesting.
Your players are all wedged between the character that's right 100% of the time and the character that's wrong 100% of the time, and both of them generate tensions that you have to be working within. So one of those might be the Mars guy, something terrible happens at Mars, and he tells you, so long as you can find a way for me to have 15 more days of food, I will survive for 45 more days. Like he tells you that, and you know it's true. So if you can make that work, it'll happen. And then you have the guy who says out loud, if we send this ship out in the next 10 days, we'll save him. And okay, we actually have to not send it in those 10 days. Something has to stop it because we know this guy's wrong.
I love the idea of almost constantly setting up spectrums that you're just trying to be in the middle of somehow. Like you're trying to like push it closer to Mars Boy, like you're trying to be like, okay, how can we make this closer to what we know is true, which is what our beautiful Mars Boy expert is saying. But there's like the pull back. You're fighting against the direct. Like, what is happening? You're fighting against the director who you know is wrong, and there is like the spectrum there. There are solutions in there that can work, and you're just trying to get them closer to the right thing. I love, one of the things I love about that idea is that there's an element of like, if the wrong character agrees with you, your plan won't work.
Yes.
Like,
and I'm obsessed with that. Yes.
If you pitch your plan too well to the director and he like makes it and he's like, okay, we can do that, but we have to do it this way, and you're like, well, that was my whole plan, now we know that's not gonna work. That's so funny.
Well, and just to make sure that people listening who haven't seen the movie know why I'm so fixated on this idea, they brought in Mr. the Newsroom to do the newsroom. And every time he reports the news, the movie very, very quickly makes it clear that the thing he said was going to happen doesn't work or was the wrong call. And the movie, the reason that I'm fixated on it is because the movie never actually addresses that directly. The movie doesn't point out that he has never said a single thing right over the course of the film. But from the top to the bottom, he's the one who doesn't want to tell the crew that Mark Watney's alive, which is like a transparently bad choice from the beginning, to the point that there's actually no tension to it, because you're like, that doesn't make any sense. And then when he does tell them they're the reason that they're able to save him, he's the one that makes the call to not do the security check that leads to the explosion. He's actually, okay, he does have one thing he does correctly, and it's that he's not weird about China. That's the one. Right. That's the one call he makes that turns out good, is that China's like, we can fix this for you, and he says, okay, thank you. Yes, please.
Absolutely
please
true. Got there being like a non-player character, this pillar, this oracle that has a limited number of things that they can be correct about. It's like 3 times per game this person can be correct. The rest of the time they're not. Like, when do you want to spend your correct, the director is right type thing?
There's an interesting possible angle there too, if he's correctly representing public opinion. Like if the thing he's doing is saying like, I want you to do this thing that will cause the Mars guy to die, but it will improve public opinion. It'll make it worse, it'll make it harder, but it will improve public opinion. And if that's a different metric you're dealing with by the end of it, which is like, maybe we do save the Martian, but we so ignored the director that NASA's getting shuttered after this, is like an interesting possible like tension.
Yeah.
I wrote a couple times in my notes about how managing PR is another resource clock in this movie.
Yeah, totally.
And the idea, like, when you started talking about this with the director, the thing that stood out for me was the idea of, like, the director is not even necessarily, like, in the game. Another thing we could do is that it's not necessarily wrong, but is introducing constraints. Is introducing, like, Watney is introducing problems, your Martian astronaut is introducing problems, and the director is introducing constraints. And I also think it's really interesting what Satah sort of pitched there, because you end up this, like, I love dice systems that have multivariate results. Like, I've never played the Genesis system for, like, the Star Wars games, but, like, you can roll, like, X complications on a success. And the idea that, like, you have these multiple possible outcomes where you succeed at some elements and fail at others, like, you get the astronaut back, but you cause this bad of a PR crisis that is this many long term for NASA, and there's not a singular win condition of this game. There is rather, what outcomes do you succeed on is really interesting.
And that makes me think of how, like, I mean, I didn't really know how this movie was going to go until 10 minutes into the movie, when it becomes clear that Mark Watney's never going to be wrong and will be safe. But up to that point, I was like, oh, I guess there is a version of this movie where we watch, like, a tragedy unfold where they don't save Mark Watney, but the Ares program survives, right? And then and there's little gestures at sacrifice, like when Sean Bean makes his little traitorous move, the director's like, you're gonna have to resign after this, we're not gonna make us watch it, we're gonna see you play golf with children and that'll be great, but you are gonna have to resign. There's little gestures at that idea that things are getting lost as a result of their public opinion. But then, you know, what the movie ends up at is, like, in the climax, it doesn't really matter. It all really boils down to whether or not he's safe. And once he's safe, everybody loves it. You know, they're going to cheer and scream. But I like the idea of introducing back in some real stakes of, like, you could lose the program after this. And that's an interesting, sad story to hit a certain point where you're like, do we care more that a space program keeps existing, or that we have this one person come home?
One of the things that I thought was interesting is that Mark Watney establishes the stakes immediately in his first video log. Like, he sits down and he's like, all right, here are the 4 points of failure that could be a problem. And then all 4 of them are like a point of failure, you know, and a series of like trackers that are like, there's small ones and then there's the big one. You know, there's like, are Mars boys food? Is the food stable? Does he have oxygen? Does he have heat? And those all add up to like, can we save him? And then there is like the PR tracker. How do people think that you're handling this? And I do like the idea of adding, of the game very explicitly being like, you can lose some of these. Like, it is not guaranteed that you will pull off what the movie does, which is everything's fine on all levels. Like, introducing some amount of, you have to balance all of these systems and one or more of them could fail, I think is more interesting for sure.
Yeah, because there's a couple points in this movie. I mean, the introduction of the Chinese Astro program is kind of a weirdly textured part of the movie, because it is like it's like a in the second third like Deus Ex Machina that's like, we've ruined this and now we're gonna bring in just like a solution, like we're gonna put it together. And I think like when you take out the possibility for a twist like that to occur in your game, you know, you introduce the possibility of actual stakes and tragedy, I think, in a cool way.
Yeah.
Here's another thing. If we introduce the stakes of the astronaut can die, we also introduce the stakes of this game can end early unless that death can only happen at the end. So in the movie, we're sort of guaranteed that Mark Watney is going to make it, right? But in our game, if we're saying you run out of a resource clock, he dies, then like we end up with this, I'm just thinking logistically, we end up with this very variable game length, which could be fine. Or there's also a version of this that everything gets worked out at the end, where like you're racking up consequences that, you know, in a fiasco game, at the end, you total up all of your dice and you find out how it went for your character. And that all is happening at the end. But there still is a version of this that is like, oh, we didn't get him enough food. So at the end of the game, oh, looks like he is like too weak to do the physical actions necessary to get on the MAV. And so they're just thinking logistically about that. Like, if we are doing a level of stakes the movie doesn't have, we end up with interesting problems, but also interesting solutions.
Yeah, and I think that's a really cool idea that I think also like leans into like, if you did again want to reintroduce the idea of something coming in and saving you, there's this fun thing where it's like, if you hit full catastrophe, then, you know, emergency button, one amazing thing happens that like moves you back toward neutral. And if you hit everything seems really safe, you're forced to do the emergency button early that moves everything kind of back toward neutral. It would be a fun way to get the pace in the right way. But I was thinking like the movie does have a couple things like that make it really hard to not wonder about consequences that they're obviously not going to touch on because it's very sad. But like I mentioned it earlier, him hanging out in that car with the plutonium just like loose is like this horrible implication
of
like
long-term health
consequences.
consequences.
Right, of what happens to him as soon as he gets home. All of the spacewalking they're doing, the amount of time he spends out on Mars, all of that, like you can tell like that's going to go bad. And they don't want to show us that. They're not interested in that part of it. But that does allow you to add texture to the how the ending goes, even if you make sure that they're coming home safe.
I love what you're saying also about the Deus Ex Machina there, because it could go, if we're doing these like sort of two separate like constraints of the astronaut and the PR, then your Deus Ex Machina could guarantee bad PR.
Yeah.
So like you are always guaranteed to solve the astronaut problem eventually, but whatever saves it generates bad PR. So like you run out of your food clock and it's like, okay, we can fix this, but we have to do something that the public is going to not like in order to do it. And I don't know what that looks like, but like I'm sure we could get there fictionally.
Well, I mean, the movie's version of this is literally xenophobia. Like they have the Chinese scientists say this needs to stay between scientists. Like, we need to not tell the world about this. And as a picture of 2035, I found that whole sequence so bizarre because it really was like...
And it's also the Chinese government. The reason that the American government doesn't know that that's an option, that NASA doesn't know that's an option, is because the Chinese government is keeping their lander details a secret, because there's secret Chinese communists not willing to let anyone know about their state secrets, something the U.S. never does, of course.
And then even after they're saved by the Chinese intervention, there's still this bizarre pot shot where Sean Bean is like, we haven't done anything like this since Apollo 9. And you're like,
yeah,
okay, dude. But yes, the PR crisis is exactly like, that is what that would be if the movie was interested in taking time on that. Would be like, they were saved by the Chinese government and the U.S. population was uncomfortable with that for some reason. And that happened.
I was thinking about that as I was saying it, and then I was like, how do you do that without the xenophobia?
Right, literally. Well, and I think like I would be interested in leaning into a more modern, like, public opinion of NASA is that it's like mostly useless. So like how do you deal with like the beginning of the game is we've fucked up and we have two things we need to do: save somebody's life because in general we know that's the right thing to do, and not make the fact that we just fucked up mean we never get funding again.
I think I'm curious if there's something here that, because I think it's interesting to me to have not only it isn't just PR, it is every character or every group has something that they are trying to balance with the mission. There's PR, there's maybe resources. For some characters, it might literally be family,
Ego.
you know, like ego. I love that. Yeah. Like, how good do you look? Is your wife going to divorce you because you're spending another 3 years in space?
Yeah, that's a great, that one phone call that's like,
yeah.
why did you choose to turn the Hermes
And so,
around?
like,
that phone call also was crazy. There was like, she's angry for literally like 3 seconds and then it's over. It's crazy.
It's a lot. But just like the idea that sort of every character, whether that's a playbook, whether that's a faction, has a thing that they are trying to balance, and if you lose that thing, you lose access to help that group can give you. They have resources, or they have moves, or they have something, and if they can't balance their other thing with the mission, you don't have that anymore.
I really like the idea of like, we've got a list of factions and they've all got an agenda and they've all got a constraint, and like, you have to appease everyone as much as possible to keep access to everything you need. That's great.
And if every player is kind of like given the opportunity to kind of represent one of those factions and their like ideals, that's like a nice way to keep that sort of balance. Like, I would have a ton of fun being like, I have to represent the horrible director who's always giving the wrong calls. And so giving me the PR faction or whatever would be really fun in that regard. I'm
thinking, this is a game that I reference constantly, very formative for me, which is Downfall. Downfall is a game for 3 people where it has you rotate characters. There's the hero. Everybody plays the hero. Every round it sort of goes to the left. And then the other 2 people are playing, I'm not going to get the names right, but they're essentially playing the villain. They're either playing literally the villain, or they are playing somebody who represents the ideology of the villain. And the other person is playing sort of the society, the centrist, the norm, like who wants the good things to happen, but also is a little bit invested in the bad stuff, you know, is kind of like, maybe the good stuff is maybe the bad stuff is okay.
The liberals.
If we have the good stuff. Yeah. And like,
but their
causes.
The
idea of like, sort of pulling that in and pulling multi-character stuff in, like the idea that there are these factions and every player has a character in every faction.
Oh.
But maybe you only ever play 2, you know, like you have sort of your major, like, my main character is this person who is representing the evil PR faction. But maybe there's also a minor character who's their assistant. And so sometimes the assistant is present in a scene to hold up that, to like represent that faction's balancing counterweight type thing.
That does really offer a lot of like, how do we represent all these diverse factions and still have what we talked about of the communication within faction, the ability to like separate and like work together and then come back. I feel like major minor character is super underappreciated in like especially GMless game design. And so having that, here's the faction I'm usually responsible for, and then like one other that I can step into, so that any scene with a given faction can always have a group for that faction, is really, really compelling.
This is the crazy scope version, the wild too big. But imagining the thing I mentioned earlier of the like asynchronous communication, meeting at different times. Like, what if you as the same table have to rotate through playing each of those groups and passing a final thing to yourselves the next time you sit down to play?
Yes.
So you are having the board meeting at NASA, you're making the PR calls, you're discussing what you need to do, and all of you are having to also make the call that's like, oh, we're going to have to ask the jet propulsion people do this thing, but they're at the end of this cycle, so we aren't going to have to worry about the jet propulsion problem until we get all the way there. Maybe by the time we get there, the person on Mars and the like the team that's working on the spaceship will solve one of these issues before our like edict has to get there. Would be a really fun feeling. You're playing a different character each time you sit down, but you're all having to make a call together that causes your own problems.
One of the things I love about the idea of this is like that. Yeah, you might be playing a different character every session, and also different sessions might just feel different. Like you might be like, well, today we're on the returning home spaceship faction, and they're just all hanging out at the beginning, you know? And so sometimes you have a session where you're like, today we're going to be vibing. Like, and you just like sort of like do like this role play of these people who are living on this ship together, and then they get pulled into the drama, and then you're having to do, but like the idea that it's essentially a series of faction turns where you are trying to pass stuff on, and then occasionally of course you need people to have their meetings. Like you need to be like, well, this is a meeting session where we're sending like a representative from every faction has to come together and present their things, and you have your like little plan that you've developed in your faction only sessions.
Imagine how good that would feel
to
suddenly
so
see
fun.
The crossover with all of your same friends playing all these characters you've seen, but getting to put them in a little new combo in a meeting.
Getting to combine your little OC dolls differently. Yeah.
There's amazing. Such like juicy betrayal possibilities in there where like you're like, okay, we're sending you as a representative, and then the character who gets sent as a representative has their own agenda, and so they have the plan, but they maybe present it in a very specific way, and everyone else at the table is like, you're currently betraying one of my other characters. Like, one of my other characters is like super annoyed at this, but that is not my responsibility right now.
Right.
My responsibility right now is to be like, I don't think that people will like it if we let him die.
Oh, and like something about that I love the to think about on a game design level is that the thing that you could do if you start leaning into that kind of social dynamic is make the math of saving him like pretty like wiggly and open. Like he basically has enough food as long as a couple things go right. He basically can make it home as long as it doesn't all catastrophize. But then you can make the act of play a series of points where people can start making it more complicated, because at first it looks like there's a lot of wiggle room. And then as you start introducing your own issues and problems and taking advantage of that wiggle room for your own
You're all
particular
getting in
needs,
each other's way and your own way.
it gets tighter.
I love that.
And because I bet we have, if we want to, this opening of everything looks really good and stable at the beginning, and then every time it gets to the Mars character's like turn, which isn't really a turn that everybody plays, there's this super high chance that just a chunk of that time goes away. Like that's just a huge possibility.
That's how
every time you
random
get there.
crisis strikes.
Yeah. So you're like, well, actually it seems great for the first couple turns, and then it would start getting scarier and scarier. Like, well, we already committed this and this and this and this to please these turns. Now, which goals that are already being met are we going to decide not to meet anymore? Like, and that is a really interesting way to handle that instead of always striving for it. Everybody claims that space really early, and then that gets whittled away, and you start having to watch your characters give up. I can't hold on to my ego. I can't hold on to this, brand partnership, whatever. Like, that might be a neat way to manage that.
And some of them, like, the Hermes has to stay in space for longer. You have to start making, like, individual sacrifices and stuff like that.
I love this structure so much. This just sounds so satisfying to get to, like, balancing all of these complicated different, like, agendas and everything with this mission in the background, which I would love, just as a general thing, to be able for the mission to be defined at the table a little bit. Like, it's not always somebody stuck on Mars, somebody slipped into another timeline, something else happened. I'm thinking in a way that, again, something I think about all the time. There is an episode of Community where they have a big debate club meet. They have the Model UN, and they specifically have two different Model UNs. There's Earth 1 and Earth 2 because they have to separate them. And part of the climax of the episode is that Earth 2 decide they all work together to rip a portal to go to Earth 1 and disrupt the other Model UN. And it's like this big thing. And that feeling, like, managing to, I think that ties into just the LARPy feeling that I was talking about, like letting people do weird sci-fi babble of, like, we've learned how to go into this alternate dimension. Let me show you. I have my dice. If we just take your car and then you like are physically moving objects around to be like, here's my representation of how we go into the other dimension to save this person.
There should be absolutely at least one character who has a move, which is anything you can successfully describe with objects in your hands is possible. Like, that's the move, right? Like, as long as everyone at the table understands what you're describing, it will work that way. Is like an amazing move.
I love that. Like, there might even be a version of it in some circumstances that's like, you can only do the charade right now. You could only act it out if someone can whatever people explain your plan back to you after watching your movements is the plan.
Oh my! I want everyone who was listening to know that our faces, Jess and I's faces, like exploded. We were like, yes.
Just like picking up your pencil and doing a complicated maneuver and everyone's watching intensely, and then someone's like, English please, and somebody goes like, okay, so I see what you're saying. We need to like double fuel the rocket. We need to coat it in gelatin. And like, that's
We're going way back to, like, the very beginning of this conversation, too, where we talked about communication restrictions. Like, we talked about those with Watney, but now thinking about it as, like, you're on Zoom calls and you're talking to people who don't understand the things that you understand. And so the communication restrictions can represent and metaphorize a variety of different things. And having that be a central aspect is so fun. Like code names and charades and, like, taking from communication-based party games. Sounds so cool.
Yeah, and the biggest challenge there, I think, is somehow that has to funnel into everybody at the table agreeing on a reasonable, like, number. Again, it's like a number of time that is getting lost at a particular plan or because of a particular thing. And like the easy, there's like some ways where you can make that fun, where like the generator gives you the number and the rough idea, and then whatever solution you come up with, will take 10 days off of your budget or whatever. But that exactly, because in the movie when they did the English please moment, which they literally do, I was like, I can't believe we're getting that in this movie on top of everything else. Well, especially because even in that moment, like everywhere else in this movie, everything is so well communicated that it is like it's like I had no problem understanding it because you did a really, really good job. But but
believe in yourself.
But weaponizing that, like, that idea of English please as the punctuation at the end of watching somebody not talk and do charades is like an unbelievably funny, like, way to handle that maneuver. Like, you literally couldn't hear them.
Yeah. God, yeah. I love the idea of trying to pull on, like, party game stuff in, like, you are there was a game that the McElroys did an expansion for that is a party game where like you're trying to guess the thing that's on a card and you're allowed to talk and then you're only allowed to say one word and then you're only allowed to make a sound and then you're only allowed to mime.
I'm literally Googling right now. It's not categories, right?
No, it's not categories, but I have played this too and I love this game. But I literally can't think of what it is. In my living room
and I'm gonna check. I'm gonna go back.
Monikers?
Yes, it's monikers. We lost them. But you did solve it.
The radio communications are down. They're too far from Pathfinder. We have no idea what's happening to them.
Okay, well, let's get excited when they tell us.
Monikers with a K.
It is monikers.
It is monikers. We reached it simultaneously. You were too far from Pathfinder. We couldn't communicate with you.
Yeah. There was a spicy chili paste falling down incident. But we're all good.
Our food clock is now down 1.
No.
Something that I love this. I love that direction. Something that I really want to lean into because I am very excited about it. So I want to go back to this little mechanic is the idea that like something akin to character creation could be a series of honestly pretty chill meetings early on that amount to everybody saying what their goal requires and then claiming that slot, right? Like the whole first play could be like you have your character sheet, you've picked what stuff you need, you're sitting down at the table and everybody's like, all right, we got 60 days. And someone's like, well, I'm the inspector and I want to make sure that everything's inspected really well. So I need 5 days for that. And at the beginning, you go through a whole session that's probably a very easy, that everybody's like, all right, we'll fill in those 5 boxes that we have free here and we'll write inspection next to it. And then someone's like, well, some of them, maybe everybody has like one core one and one kind of like lighter one. And you have the one that's like, well, I want my face painted on the side of the rocket ship and that will take a day. And people are like, yeah. Well, right now we have 30 days. So sure, like we'll fill out one of those days and we'll put face paint on rocket ship. And then when those get cut, you get to play with, now the meetings are more tense because every person has already got everything they want on the docket. But you have to decide as a group, like, what are we cutting? And if you don't decide, again, I'm imagining we have 3 groups. If you don't decide to cut anything, if everybody is like, no, we want to keep all this stuff, then when you pass it forward, it gets increasingly more urgent that other people give up something.
Yeah.
And you like literally, and if you don't fix it by the end of that, then maybe something bad happens. Like the Martian Oracle hits again. Like if you don't give it up by a full cycle, give up important things by a full cycle, then you get an extra bad thing that happens that makes it even worse. So
there's almost the feeling of like all of the professors are acting like they're the only people assigning you homework.
Yes.
Kind of vibe.
Yeah. I'm also thinking about trying to think about when we talk about like these PR and ego consequences. Like, what does it mean for something to have narrative but not mechanical consequences, but in a satisfying and interesting way? And so what I mean is, like, if we're going the version of the movie where, like, you can always eventually solve the problem, but you have interesting other consequences that maybe aren't mechanical, which is to say JPL has to work overtime, which happens in that, and the Hermes crew needs 500 more days in space, and that the consequences are always one group takes a narrative hit, and if we're imagining a version of this game that isn't as abstract as it's only represented by Project Dice, like we're doing scenes, we spend a session where we are hanging out on the spaceship, we send a session where we are JPL planning and we are in the office, we are doing office politics, then having to work overtime and having to spend longer on the spaceship are real consequences because you're playing them out. You're not just saying, and now we worked overtime. You're playing an exhausted character who is like, I need to get home to my wife. And so, like, that lets us introduce, always solve the problem, but introduce consequences that are narrative, which doesn't have to be the approach, but, like, I feel like it gives us a lot of room.
And if you wanted to make the weight, kind of supported by the game, one method of doing that is to have it be literally written down or decided on ahead of time. Like, what is the consequence of you not getting this? And it should always be the worst thing. So it's like at first you are asking everybody at the table, and maybe it's a secret. Maybe you're not even allowed to say what the consequence is going to be. But at the table, you're like, I need my face painted on this spaceship. And everybody's like, that's super stupid. That's not going to happen. Of course not. And then you get to the end and it's like, well, the punchline of that is that in the epilogue form that we build of the single sentence consequences, that character is 100% forgotten in the history books. Like, is not present as ever having participated because they failed to get their face on the spaceship, which is like silly, but it's like that way you get that tension of like, I'm trying to convince everybody that this ridiculous thing is important and nobody's believing you. And then at the end, everybody gets hit with that punch of like, they didn't believe you and you're gone. Like, it didn't, it did matter.
Love the idea of secretly written down like narrative consequences so much. Like, okay, if we work overtime, I'm getting a divorce.
Right, exactly. That was
none of you know that.
Yes, yes.
It's so good. And everyone, like, we have the same concept. Like, we're doing our JPL session, and overtime is going to be necessary if we can't meet our things. At the beginning of the session, everyone writes down, this is the bad thing that happens to me if we work overtime. Like, I get physically ill, I have a divorce, I do this. And everyone has their own different motivations for why they don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
And maybe that even lets us then expand outward into who works overtime.
Yes.
Who faces their consequence among these different sets.
Well, and even if one way to do that too could be themed consequences that are kind of random, so you don't even really know for sure, but you know that it's on the table that you roll divorce, right? Like, it's like you don't even necessarily know. And then there could be the other side, which is like, if you hit your goals, if those still make it into the final like timing of the mission, then you have a positive thing that gets added to the epilogue that's like about your experience at the end. And I can imagine a fun like a document that gets built out of a series of sentences that then you get the epilogue moment of like Mark Watney going to become a professor. But then we zoom out from that and see like, and then I went golfing and everybody loved me,
This is really revisiting that like very fiasco ending mechanic of building up your, how does it go for your character? And I really like that of like you're accumulating these consequences that in the end you're assembling into an epilogue document. Is really fun to me.
Yeah, I really like that. That's such a fun, and I that adds to that moment that I sort of called out before of like, it matters who you send to a meeting.
Yes.
Because if you're sending the, I'm going to get a divorce if this goes wrong person, and they're up against somebody whose stakes are in this moment narratively not weighing quite as much, like that will give those specific characters very unique push, like ways that they're going to try and push the agenda forward. And that's so cool. I like that idea a lot.
And if you're inhabiting multiple roles, you get to start going, well, I know that if I ask this person across the table to take overtime, my character in that group is going to face this consequence. And you're ending up in these like, which OC do I care about the most? Who do I want to have the good ending here? And that opens up also other secret communication aspects of like, is there an ability at a certain time to like pass your secret consequence over and be like, listen, we're going to go aside and the two of us are going to have a secret meeting in fiction. And I'm going to be like, dude, my wife is going to divorce me if I have to do this. Can you please make this budge? But you can only do that under certain rules.
Well, I'm thinking something that's fun is, we've talked about having the two different tracks of like PR and time. Like, and if both of those are kind of a numerical idea, like a meter, and everybody's goals kind of end up filling those meters in some form. Like we have this much PR things going bad that we can mess with, and some of our goals will fill up that meter, and we have this much on time, and some of ours will fill up that. But we have this possibility for things to get way worse, and then this possibility for things to occasionally loosen back up. Like, he figured out how to do potatoes. He figured out how to do that. Then you get to jump immediately right back into, we haven't hit the epilogue yet. I'm headed for divorce. If I can claim these 5 blocks, I can undo the thing that's currently on track for me. And that like, then you get to do that. You get to flip it a second time of like, everybody has decided that this is the most important stuff, but we got another piece of wiggle room. So now what is literally the most important now? We know the characters a little more.
Yeah.
We know a little more how much we care about them. We got to see how sad they got. What is the, like, which one of these do we want to give back to a character? Who's earned it again? Is a really interesting.
You get a scene of the character who's on the brink of divorce at a press conference giving a way too metaphorical speech about what's going on. Just being like, yeah, I mean, look, this journey has been really hard, but I think that I think that what we've all learned is that it's really the people in our lives that maybe we've taken advantage of for a little too long, but who really have grounded us, just like our rocket grounded. And it's like, yeah, you did it. You get to, because you did your speech really good, you get to reclaim some of the time from your divorce clock, and now you're okay.
Divorce clock is killing me.
Yeah, and I think I would feel so like I would have so much fun as a player watching the worst possible thing that could happen to me be switched on and off. Like, that's such a fun, it's such a fun feeling to have your character know with 100% certainty I am getting a divorce, and then know with 100% certainty I'm not getting a divorce. Things are totally fine. Right now it's all chill, but know that every choice is going to nudge you into worst possible or completely fine. I think is such a perfect engine of conflict and conversation. And if the characters all have different spheres that they're worried about, so if not every player is dealing with divorce, but if everybody has like something that's actually very hard to easily like rank, when you were designing it, we have to be careful to not be like, this is somebody dies and this is get a divorce. Like, you have to figure out what is the interesting like way they can all feel that allows part of what you're learning from the game, how your table of players values certain things, totally. and connects with certain characters. And that would be like an interesting output of it. Seeing like everybody being like, well, we all know the game already assumes making sure this guy gets home alive is the most important thing, period. Like, we all know that. We're not going to destroy that in order to avoid getting a divorce. But we are going to be negotiating in the middle. Like, what is fame more important? Is the love more important? Whatever.
That's really fun. Yeah. So sort of like weighing the success and failure of like, I think that that's a great way to do sort of guaranteed success of a certain thing. Just be like, look, we're going to get the Martian home, unless like, I guess if you as a table decide to go super off script and you're like, actually, I don't care, let him die on Mars. I love my wife. Like, cool. you navigate those consequences yourself. But for the game to just kind of assume you're going to do this, how are you going to do it? I think is always one of my favorite ways to navigate that stuff.
Also, I might be unnecessarily shifting us to a boil down conversation here, but I'm getting really interested in what you were saying earlier, Satah, about like, how do we genericize this? And then how that intersects with some of these ideas we're pitching here about these like personal consequences. Like, how do we hit the right level of like generic and specific? And I'm thinking about like, if we're talking so much about the personal consequences of these people who are helping from afar. And so I'm picturing in my head this like, every mission is to bring someone home. And that could be from another universe, another planet, another galaxy, wherever. Every mission is bring someone home, and you decide at the table who that is. And your different groups are like management or bureaucracy, scientists or researchers. Like, I'm trying to find like words for this. And you're getting these archetypes of types of groups. And then we can dole out what personal consequences look like for management, what personal consequences look like for scientists, what personal consequences look like for like a word for like on the ground people, which would be Hermes, the people actually executing a plan. And so we've got these generic archetypes of people who would be involved in a mission to rescue a person who is hard to get to.
I think, having talked so much about this structure and being so excited about it, I think that I might be wrong about genericizing it.
Okay.
I think that there's some stuff that's a lot of fun there. I think that at least starting off pretty specific of like, there's somebody on a planet, and we'll work to define the specific factions for that specific scenario, I think would be really generative. And then sort of looking at, can these be massaged, like, or is that just sort of a like, this is what the game says it is. Yes, at your table you can flavor this however you want, like that's on you. But like, as much as I love the like letting it be able to be different crises, the more that we sort of dug into the structure, the more enamored I was with being able to like get really specific of like, this is the rocket crew. You know what I mean?
Yes, that gives us the ability to prompt in so much more specific ways that can get really interesting.
Yeah, and since here on This Should Be a Game, you're trying to do some really hard-hitting manipulative business, it also lets you make sure that you can sell 100 different versions of it that you handcrafted without having to give people the easy way out, you know?
Play sets.
And so, but what I was going to say about that is I think the thing that this setup really gives you that's very useful for what we're describing and the kinds of emotional pulls we're describing is that each of these groups has a different level of assumed commitment to the cause. And that changes both the stakes of your like negative things and about how much that set of characters is expected to give up. I was thinking about how the reason that I started thinking about this is because I was thinking another really important feeling here would be to have a set of this time goals be dedicated to things about Mark Watney, right? That are like, if he doesn't have 10 of these days, he comes back sickly. If he doesn't have 15 of these days, he gets a divorce. And he doesn't get to pick. He's an oracle. Like, he is just like sitting there taking up that space. And so there's this flow of that's like, okay, well, we're saving that guy's life. So at a table, how much do we care about that guy's quality of life versus life? And if somebody's making a sacrifice to get home, I'm speaking as a villain here, shouldn't it be him first? Like, otherwise he's just going to die. So let's carve his stuff down a little because we are all doing all of this work to make sure that he comes home and he's not even a player at our table, period. Like, the temptation of that is what I'm talking about, the interesting temptation of that. And then as you go from that to like Hermes' crew, you know, in the movie, it's a given. The Hermes crew is going to give up whatever they have to save him. Like, they have a conversation where she's like, let's sit and really think about it. And nobody thinks about it, right?
They're all on board immediately.
So you have a crew where it's easy to role play out like, okay, we're already in space. We really care about this person. We really want this. We're going to be the first layer to make it kind of like us giving stuff up seems obvious, right? Like, I will get a divorce, but I'm going to feel like such a hero because I'm like on the table. And then we get all the way down to like people on the ground who care about the PR, who are not inherently a hero, but could become a hero as a result of how this goes, right? Could become important because of how they handled it. And that stuff on the other end looks really easy to give up because it's a little bit flimsy. It's a little less important, but it also, the consequences are way more like dire for them than the consequence for the person who's already getting to be a rocket ship hero, right? Some of that stuff is a given for them no matter what. You could even have that written in, like the epilogue. No matter what, Mark Watney survives. Every member of the crew of the Hermes becomes the most famous person in their field. Yeah. Like, that stuff's just gonna happen. So what else can you sacrifice? And
the characters of each faction, like I think that this was touched on at some point during this, but you're building the epilogue during the course of play, and there's stuff you can change in it, but the idea that like everybody has 1 or 2 or 3 lines that are definitely true and it's per faction, and then you're filling in the rest.
I was imagining like Mad Libs, like literally a Mad Libs epilogue document where like based on your result, Satah is so great at Mad Lib style tables where like different results fit into different places in the sentence. And so having the amount that you achieve your different objectives determine a bonus on a roll or a penalty on a roll for how that Mad Lib slots in at the end is so fun to me.
And giving players this tools to negotiate over. We're so far out of what literally happens in The Martian and so deep into what I wish was happening in The Martian now. But
that's good adaptive media though. Like I'm constantly on one. It's like you have to know what you love and what you want and what you're like, I could do this better. So perfect.
But that feeling of like we have some of this stuff at the source document that lets us, when we're all playing as the PR people, go like, no. Like, I'm not going to give up my face on the side of the rocket ship. It's already written in that they are going to be the astrophysicist on Earth for the next 15 years. They've already got that on the document.
Yeah.
They can sacrifice their marriage. I am getting my face on the spaceship. And that you get to... I don't know how this would play out. This would require real testing, but it sounds like such a fun exercise in, like, negotiating with yourself almost. That feeling of like, like what do I really care about, and how do I feel about me when I'm playing that guy versus me when I'm playing this one. I really love imagining that.
The having multiple characters and spending meaningful time with them in different sessions is really hitting for me. I just keep thinking about it, and the way that will, like, people will very naturally have developed favorites of, yes, like, you know, I want to be playing this character more. I'm more interested in the relationships that I have going on in this faction and that kind of thing. And I really love that as an exercise in being like, why is that? What, like, notice that in yourself. Like, what do you like? How are you learning something about what you like in games? That's awesome. You know?
It's fun to get to talk about game design with y'all, because that is, like, I mean, it's very revealing of what I'm most excited about in game design, which is, like, what is the social and internal output of the game? Even more than the design, it's like, what is the thing that we get to learn about ourselves as a result of playing? And that feels like such a strong, like, nugget of information.
Yeah. Fully agreed.
Meta level for a second. Friend of the show, Jeff Stormer, talks a lot about how Party of One is an interview podcast done playing a 2-player game, an interview actual play podcast, and how like, you learn about the person through how they play the game. And I'm coming to really like in This Should Be a Game the way that this is an like, we learn about how different guests value different things in games. We've already seen that going from, like, Will to Dora, and, like, what is the aspect of this you want to focus on? And so I'm just really loving you noting that it's cool to have this conversation because we see what we as designers value. It's so cool to see, as different guests comes in, what they value reflected in how the game shifts when we talk to each guest. So yeah, it's very fun.
And I'm realizing how much of these ideas line up with a project that I've literally been, like, mulling over for about a year that is a lot about, like, the development of history. Like, what does it mean when history is put together? And I have, like, a fantasy filter over it, like a medieval filter for this game that I'm working on that I can barely talk about because it doesn't exist, and it will be too crazy if anybody knows that it's happening. But that I've been thinking a lot about that feeling of the, like, what happens when we all at the table have to talk about legacy, and what happens when our characters have to decide about something that happens already when you're playing tabletop games or when you're engaging with any story, which is that eventually things get whittled down. Like, the things you remember get whittled down. Yes. And this idea of building this epilogue document, like a thing that at the end of your play says, like, this is what happened. Like, all of the other things that occurred don't really matter anymore, and you're kind of allowed to forget them because what happened was this. Like, this is the thing that occurs in the world going forward, and that feeling is, like, automatically bittersweet for me in a way that I always want from a role-playing game anyway. So I'm like, delicious.
I was so on one about historiography in college, so I'm so there with you on, like, how do we choose the narrativized history. And I'm also thinking from a design perspective, there was a bunch of discourse at one point about, like, I'm trying to remember exactly what the discourse was, but it was like Bluesky or Twitter discourse about, like, does tabletop gaming produce a story? Are you telling a story? And there were some corners of this that, like, their take on this was that the unique aspect, and I don't necessarily agree with the ways that this was being presented, but I think it is a useful thought exercise, like much discourse that wants to be right but is actually just useful as perspectives from which to think. They talk about the idea that, like, so much of what is unique about tabletop gaming is you go, what if all of this happens? Or you get half in character and you start joking around, and you never define whether the jokes that you made were things that happened in the fiction. You never go, now let's sit down and reconcile all of this. And you might decide later that, like, oh yeah, remember when I said that? Yeah, well, now this, and now you've canonized it because you're building off of it. But that you're not building a linear story or narrative of what happened. You are, in fact, constantly experimenting with potential fictions, none of which necessarily resolve into a story. And I think that's a really interesting perspective when we start to talk about epilogue and legacy, and the idea that this game uniquely does boil down to these things happen. And it doesn't mean that all of those potential fictions and all of that process didn't exist, but like it is a unique aspect of the game and becomes a focus of the game that like we are going to reconcile some of what happened here at the end and we are going to walk away with like things that are very important, which puts a focus that, for example, an adventure game that the only thing it's necessarily building to is maybe a climax with the big bad does not have that focus on, and how will the fiction resolve, and that warps the game in an interesting way.
It makes me think about how, like, and this is my evil game designer, like, I'm happy to be the bad guy of game design feeling, is like, the thing I like about that is the production of the document means that the telling of the story of the gameplay is going to evoke an emotional response in each player that's different based on how their characters turned out. And there's this like way you'll be unable to forget for some degree for the rest of your life when you look at the document and it says it doesn't mention like the person who had the consequence, like your name cannot appear on this document.
Yeah.
And like you know that character, and actually they did a really cool thing in the middle of the campaign, and you like really want to tell everybody about it. And from that point forward, the thing that exists of your campaign is this document that everybody looks at, and you have to be the one for the rest of your life that's bearing the torch of like, that person was real. We can't put them on the document. We weren't allowed to, but I remember this. They were there. And that like I've been really into, obviously, like that feeling of like carrying something out of the game that like latches onto you and makes you the like torchbearer of that thing or that feeling. And
but Caleb, what if someone has to feel something difficult while they're playing the game?
Good. Good, and it's evil that I'm saying this. It's so bad that I'm saying good.
I'm rude now. Even just like things like writing in the epilogue, so and so is married, so and so is happily married, and looking at that and going like, they were really close to divorce a few times. Because there's also, I mean, this is kind of a whole other conversation, but the difference between writing down so and so is still married versus so and so is happily married.
Yes.
Versus just relationship status married or something like that.
But
like,
I think you have to do the biggest. It has to be, but I think it has to be the biggest positive or the biggest negative, and that's what makes it into history. I think you have to, because I think then, just like you're describing, the nuance is something the players have to carry with them. Like the history doesn't hold on to that, right?
Yeah.
And that's fun because then you'd feel tempted. You'd feel like I want to clarify this. I want to make this document different. Like, I want the final output of this to be clearer. I want to make it longer. I want to add details. I want this person's name to be on it. And the game is telling you, like, no. This is what's going into the class that Mark Watney is teaching at the end of this film. And you are only going to get to transmit to the students what's on this document.
Are we writing obituaries?
It's maybe, literally maybe.
Like, is it, because I'm just thinking of, if you look at someone's obituary and it says they are survived by their wife of this many years, you don't see that they nearly got divorced in the middle of a Martian crisis, you know? But you might, if you say like they are survived by their 2 kids and wife who now has a different last name or like something like that.
Oh my God. Well, having it say they presided over the final year of NASA's functioning existence.
Oh my God.
Like they are broadly considered responsible for the end of NASA. Is like
shit.
And then if the president character who has all these things going against them, but they do know my obituary will say this if I fuck this up, right?
It's at least like the details of a Wikipedia article on somebody, you know?
Yeah.
Like you see like they worked here and project defunded in this, you know? Like there's something I think maybe I'm actually going to flag that for a future episode to see if we can just really drill down into like if there's a specific format that is like most interesting for this document to take. But like generally the idea of an obituary, just the sparks note of your life that people will write down versus whether you're going to get one at all, is cool.
A really interesting connection I'm seeing here is that we're moving into a documentary frame. you know, in a documentary during the credits when they're going, and here's what happened to this character, and
Yeah.
here's what happened to this character, and here's what... And this movie is kind of like a fake propaganda-style documentary. It is a fictionalized documentary of something that never happened, with a tone that does not have the hard-hitting tone of a real documentary, but rather a documentary that wants to, tell you this propagandized story. And so... thinking of our game through a documentary frame is really interesting. Like, this is a big enough departure that probably it's a different game, but like each of our scenes being what the documentary captures of the JPL talking to each other, and then getting our documentary credits scene, it at least could be a fruitful perspective from which to view some of our design process.
Yeah,
and some of the coolest shots of the film, honestly, the times where I thought it wouldn't work at all, some of the coolest shots are transitions from what's being shown to the public, what's being shown on the technology versus what's actually happening. There's some really, really gorgeous, like you're seeing someone on CNN and then the filter drips away and you're in the real room. And that stuff happens a couple different times in a way that works really, really well. And I completely agree with you about the propaganda thing. When the film ended and everybody was cheering in Times Square, I was like, oh, and the two Chinese science officials were clapping politely in the audience, and they were like making a real point of how they were hanging out in this space, and there was all this weird stuff where I was like, this is a propaganda film.
Yes.
And including his video logs. I was really surprised that his video logs never became part of what was happening. Nobody ever saw them. We never talked about them. They were just for us. But they are a documentary. That is how that would work.
There's a lot of he's also just constantly writing on stuff. Like, he writes, be nice to this Mars car, it saved my life, or whatever, and it's like, who's gonna see that, buddy? Yeah. I guess the next
our
mission,
epilogue.
Oh, it would be so fun if your messages from the Martian that came with the crises had some texture to them that was delivered to you kind of dry, but that implied like some silliness to them. Like, it would say like, and they complained about the limited music available on the thing, and then you as a group get to be like, oh my god, that's because we left the only Nickelback CDs,
narrativizing why that situation was produced. Absolutely.
Look at this again graph. I think we'll open up a tangent, but possibly there's something here of the person who's on Mars is mostly not played by anybody, is mostly an oracle. The idea that quietly, like, each person writes a little journal entry from the Martian and doesn't share it with anybody else. And everybody sort of in a sequence, like day one, it's write a little journal entry from the Martian, and just like everybody in a sequence without even possibly reading each other's. And then at the very end, you have to you can all together for the first time, as when you save him, you don't know what his total personal narrative was until that, and then you're looking at all of these journals and like connecting them and everything. This is like a whole other section, but part
of the epilogue document is also his record that no one had a one picture of.
The thing that's making me really excited to think about is, it's reminding me of the 10 Candles death speech mechanic, right, where you ahead of time write something that comes out at a particular moment and you don't really know how true it's going to sound, but you're kind of working toward it to try to make it sound as true as possible, because you're like, I want this to hit really hard for my friends, and I made this big swing during that. That feeling, but everybody writes journal entries that are given kind of a tight parameter, like 3 sentences about something that happened to you that day, and those journal entries get randomly paired with the event to create like a funny texture, because then it's like airlock blew open, all the potatoes froze, and then the message we get from him is like, feeling pretty lonely, listened to the Nickelback song the 100th time today, right? And you're like,
really missing his potatoes.
Yes. And it's like, what does that tell us about this person? How do those two pieces come together into like, why are they talking about that now? And then it creates this automatic character. It would create this automatic character for Mark Watney of being like dry and funny and not worried, which is kind of what his deal is. It just comes across sort of like repetitive disco jokes, dad jokey, Gen X-y. But in this, it would be this like, oh, this person is just like straight ahead saying the things they're feeling, and we're getting notified oh, and also like they are on fire for half of this day, but what they're talking about is ketchup, right? Like that creates a character so powerfully, I think, that you could then depend on. Like every table will sit down and play, and the texture of that Martian character will have this energy to it of terrible thing next to thing you complain about in space.
I love that. That is such a fun way to give character to this unplayed person who ultimately the game completely revolves around.
Yes.
That's really fun.
And lets you have some stuff like built in that's like, you know, just rules of the thing. Like everybody loves him. So it's like there's a comedy that's going to happen there. Like the universe loves him. They want him back. Like that's a key part of it. Like all the people in the world like him. And that like getting to, but then you have that funny feeling too of, I would imagine the first time a group plays this game, they'd be like, I'm writing about ketchup. I'm writing about being lonely. I'm writing about this. And then the second time you play, you're like, okay, I wonder what if I can like do something that actually lines up. Like what if I
saw an alien today.
Right.
Girl, what? No, Mark. We don't have time for this.
The first meeting after every time something terrible happens, you don't actually get to address it. The first meeting is always in the cycle, the PR group, and you're deciding whether or not to forward it. Like, I also love the idea of that feeling. You get told the horrible thing, and then you have a whole session where you're actually not allowed to address it at all. Like, you can't even discuss what to do until 2 times later.
I am so in love with the, to me, incredibly satisfying, and I understand absurdly complicated, weird social dynamic that we are creating of like, we are all keeping secrets from ourselves and each other that we all know are there. Like we all know right now that we're keeping a secret, that we know. We made that decision last week to not let ourselves know that this was happening. And like, I'm so in love with that. And one of the things I really like about the sort of themey, like this is in part about creating a document that is like what you remember, is that gives just cute permission to like get it wrong sometimes, in the game in a way that I think is really sweet. I love this.
Are we making everyone as John? Is Mark Watney John?
Not quite, but that is something that I was thinking about everyone as John while I was watching the movie and trying to like conceptualize what might happen. We're kind of doing the opposite because everything's external rather than everything being internal.
Absolutely.
But
like, I think Moon is everyone is John.
Like everyone having their own motivations that they're trying to push forward is very core to
that's
that
what I'm
gameplay.
Is it all revolves around this person who none of us are, but we all have our own motivations out of how we interact with them. Is like it is inverse. Everyone is John. Everyone is not John.
No one is John.
No one is John.
Okay, I'm so thrilled with this. I want to briefly just sort of like highlight what we're most excited about from this conversation that we can kind of carry forward to the rest. What sort of stood out to me was we have this idea of multiple different factions. We have a group of players, and each player has a character in every faction. They might bring a character to a specific meeting. We're having a lot of like interfaction meetings. One session might be like, here's the Rocket faction having their meeting, here's the PR people having their meeting, and they are communicating to each other, but they are doing it asynchronously. They are in some way, forwarding information internally, through the different factions. We have this bigger structure that is about, there's this big mission, and we have a time tracker, and this time tracker is sort of being filled and having time reclaimed from it based on the actions of the characters and the factions. And those actions are very motivated by both the characters' individual consequences that they're trying to avoid, like they don't want to do overtime so that they don't get divorced, and it's also possibly balanced by some sort of factional stuff like, hey, if the PR gets too bad, the program will be shut down. We also talked about this element of the person who is stuck on Mars not being a player character, but being sort of like an oracle randomness-based entity that everyone is narrating around, who is also occasionally given the chance to communicate with something that was written completely out of context and is pulled in to sort of like, in this generated way, show the synchronicity and the conflict with like, here's an event that we know just happened, and here's what this person is communicating to us and what that says about us and what that says about them. And we know that this is all building towards an epilogue that is a written document that has certain restrictions on it for what you're even allowed to put into the permanent record, sort of just commenting on what it means to have a history, what it means to be part of history, to make a history and make yourself part of it. There's also an element that I didn't tie in explicitly there that I really liked of weird communication restrictions. Like sometimes you do a weird little mime routine and then somebody says out loud what they think your plan was based off of that, and then that's the plan going forward. And so there's like, I think that feels to me like it would probably fit into sort of like session mechanics in some way. Like there are moves that happen with communication when you're meeting with people.
I think that's the bulk of the challenge of designing this, is how do you make each group feel a little different like each time, and how do you make their mechanics like ultimately negotiate with the time system and with the individual goals, but have play and the way that they interact with the world be a little different based on their sphere. Can I pitch a structural, like a totally already over designed structural idea for how that pieces together?
Absolutely.
The like different groups? Okay, so you go through, you have PR group has a meeting, they decide how they're going to talk about it, what their moves are in the world to try to get the PR better. Then you have the like actual people on the ground, probably the combination of JPL and the like actual NASA like
the sort
smart
of
people team.
technicians or whatever.
They're doing stuff. Then you have the spaceship team, whatever. Then you have a group meeting. In that group meeting, you randomly generate the order that people give updates on what they did during those meetings. And after 2 of them are done, but before the 3rd, you get the Mark Watney update. So then it's randomly generated. So you don't know who's going to get the like, we just found this out and I still have to tell you about what I did last week slot. But that is like, or maybe you randomly generate when the Mark Watney hits every time and it's different no matter what. And then the tone of that meeting changes based on whether you get it first or all the way at the end or in the middle or whatever. And then after you get that information, everybody has that meeting, those people are all there. So as a group where they're all representing different groups, they can react in the moment and be like, okay, well, we'll probably have to do this. And then everybody can kind of seed in each other, like, well, my group would want you to do this and you better not blah, blah, blah. And then you have to split back up and you can't talk to each other except as like your separate groups for the next like chunk until you get back to that meeting and another jolted mark. That's my like, I was sitting there while you were talking and was like, I see the picture in my mind.
I was literally taking notes that are so along these lines at the same time, which is that the idea that like, what if rather than like a full session as each group, it's a session is split into an hour-long phase with each group, and then at the end of a session, you have your cross-group meeting where like each session is a crisis cycle. You have one big new crisis from the astronaut that is introduced. You're solving last session's new crisis and dealing with the consequences of last session's reconciliation meeting. And at the end, you're talking about what you did in these individual meetings, and you're reconciling what happens because of what we've all talked about today. What do we actually finalize and do? And then that passes consequences to your teams for the next session as you go through that cycle again.
Yeah, I love that. And I also like that, we can be thinking about, how those break down in hour-long chunks or whatever. But at the end of the day, if it's a campaign game, you have complete flexibility to be like, I really want to hang out on this spaceship all day. Like, we'll come back to this next time. And that just sounds so nice. Wow, what an amazing game idea to get to play basically 4 games. And you're a sci-fi the whole time? What a dream.
Yay! Well, this was fantastic. Thank you, Caleb. I loved this conversation so much, and I'm so excited for the bizarre, just huge, wild direction that this developed in. I'm so thrilled with what we are coming out of this. And I don't remember who our next people are, but I think that we also have Dusty Hill and Kendrick Smith on this series. Is that correct?
How cool.
Yes, that's 2 and 3.
And so we're going to talk with them. We're going to dive into some stuff, and then we're going to come back at the end and just sort of synthesize it down into a thing. And I'm so happy with this. I'm just absolutely thrilled with the direction that this is going. And I think that's pretty much it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
Thank you. Where can do you have any plugs to drop?
Go to shop.hauntedtable.games or patreon.hauntedtable.games if you want to see writing, most especially on Triangle Agency coming up soon. That's my main thing. If you want to find me on social media, I talk on Bluesky, but to be honest, I'm mostly talking about line dancing. So that's kind of a your mileage may vary sort of situation.
It's a treat. It's good. Jess, how about you?
You can find me on Bluesky as at jessfrom.online, where I'm mostly talking about sci-fi lesbians. By the way, shout out Beth Johansson in this movie for having famous actual pornographic text adventure game Leather Goddesses of Phobos on her laptop.
Whoa.
Love that.
Is
for
that the
her.
one that kisses Sebastian Stan?
Yeah, that's
Why
the
would they
thing.
do that?
It was so
I
strange.
know, it would have been so much more interesting if she was just gay, and they didn't. Yeah, you know what? Compulsory heterosexuality. She is to me. You know what?
Her line readings were also kind of wild. I get what she was doing, but some of those line readings were off the charts weird.
Absolutely.
This movie should have done better by Kate Mara and Beth Johansson. But anyway, you can find me
Criminally
talking about
underutilized.
You can hear me talking about criminally underutilized should be lesbian characters as at Jess from Online on Bluesky, and you can find all my games at jumpgategames.itch.io.
And yeah, you can find me on Bluesky, posadaships.gaygothvibes.online. You can find a bunch of stuff that I do at gaygothvibes.online. You should sign up to the Haunted Table Patreon to see some games that we are working on. At this point, I believe that there should be a fun little preview of The House Edge, which is
It's a card crawl.
It's a card crawl.
A casual card crawl.
And I think that is about it. So this, of course, has been This Should Be a Game, a podcast about the moment where you say, this should be a game.
This should be a game.
I'm thinking this should be a game.
Beautiful. Follow the show on Bluesky at thissshouldbeaga.me and join our Discord at discord.thissshouldbeaga.me to talk games with us. Support the show financially on Patreon to vote for the genres and movies we cover, send in audio messages for mechanical mailbag episodes, and read the notes we take while watching stuff for the show. Thank you to Cris Viana for the logo and Nicky Flowers for the theme song. Both of them are linked in the show notes, as well as any games we referenced in our discussions. Now's your chance to head out to the lobby and grab some snacks and join us next week to continue this discussion with Dusty Hill. Oh my god.
Considering what that was before you stumbled, it's kind of wild because it was the most impressive series of syllables.
Normally, if I stumble on my Bluesky username, I just make myself keep going because it's my own fault that it's so stupid, but I choked on the middle of another word, and so I stopped.
That does... Oh, go ahead.
No, you got it. I was going to just start babbling.